It may seem like the political season is a long way away, but there are groups on the ground trying to make ready for campaigns that are still to come. One of those people is Elana with Rural People's Voice, a campaign based in Okanagan County. Elana, thanks for being here.
Well, I'm so happy to be here.
Tell me a little bit about yourself and your background and how you came to become co-director of Rural People's Voice.
Well, I live in Okanagan County, and Rural People's Voice is actually a pretty new organization. We're really in our third year and our second year of programming, but I myself have been a social worker my whole life. I mean, I started working in homeless shelters when I was 18, and grew up in Eastern Washington. I was born in Chewelah. Like, Eastern Washington is my DNA. And for 7 years, I ran a nonprofit, a social service organization out in Okanagan County. In the last couple of years of work there, we had so many folks who walked through the door that worked 40 hours a week and just still couldn't make ends meet, much less plan for their retirement or feel like they had the confidence that they had enough money to put their kids through school. So, we talked to a lot of our representatives and started to kind of pivot our approach as an organization and talk to more of our elected leaders about how to get the folks that we were talking to every day more of what they need. And I will say, kind of regardless of political orientation, most of the people that we talked to wanted the same things. They wanted to be able to afford their prescription drugs. They wanted health care. They wanted child care. They wanted caregivers they could afford. They wanted reliable housing. It was just so clear throughout that period. And again, I'm from here, but the ground beneath rural people is eroding. So we started thinking about what are the bigger tectonic shifts that help us build the kind of power that rural people really need, especially rural working families. And we decided to start to develop leadership, help people win seats, and try to put the roots into organizing that help rural people get together and have more collective power.
What was your first experience in a political campaign?
I left my job and we ran Adrian Moore for state representative in 2020. And we ran that campaign to win, but we also ran it as an organizing campaign, really to learn about kind of what we're up against in rural Washington, what it takes to win a seat, genuinely what rural people really need. The campaign was unique. We had 40 young people who called themselves the future of the 12th that were part of the campaign. We had 100 neighborhood captains. We each took on a list of 50 voters and contacted them 5 times just to talk to them about the issues that mattered most to them. So that campaign really did help us. We talked about it as like a lightning bolt. When it hit the ground, it sort of helped us illuminate, who is organizing in rural Washington? Who is the base of people that are already activated? What are our shared values? And in that way, there was so much that we won from that campaign. It also gave us the foundation of our first steering committee. So we have right now we have 35 steering committee folks who make decisions about the candidates that we get behind. They make decisions about endorsements, they make decisions about recruitment, and they participate in lots of different ways.
And your roots are in Okanagan County, but you are interested in helping people to organize for political office throughout North Central Washington.
It's true, yeah. We are in Okanagan County, but there is no doubt that North Central Washington is deeply connected. Not just by the Columbia River, but by our economies, by our communities, by our demographics. So the region itself has so much connectivity. And so we focus in Chelan, Douglas, and Okanagan County.
So it sounds like as a social worker, you were seeing people encountering just a lot of headwinds trying to get ahead or make ends meet. And did you feel like, well, if I want to really make a difference, the social work is good on the receiving end, but let's try to do policy changes that address these problems before they become a crisis for people?
I think that's right on. And some nuance in both how we approach our work and in that story is that the folks that we talked with every day, the difference between them and me is about an inch, right? There's a lot of working class people who are struggling to make ends meet, and then a lot of middle class people who feel like they could slip down the ladder at any moment. And these are the same folks that I grew up with. It's the same people that I call community now. And it's true. I love that concept of the headwinds coming at us. The headwinds are really strong. And in the end of the day, we've been told multiple times that the pathway to power doesn't go through rural Washington. And I think that political abandonment or sort of neglect of investment in rural Washington is told through every struggle we see, if it's a mental health crisis, the way substance abuse affects our community, or crime and reporting. And which I heard you say is increasingly part of your job out here.
All the time.
Yeah.
And I think there's a regional identity question too, because rural people might see their own problems and say, well, the cause is over there. The cause is in the city, the cause is on the west side of the state. And maybe to a certain extent that's true. Olympia is on the west side of the state, and your goal is, I think, ultimately to have people headed to Olympia who can help people in the rural areas.
Yeah. We also get sold a lot of stories out here about who is to blame. And I think some of those stories are, they're misleading, but they're also meant to divide working families, because it keeps an economic system in place where, the rich get richer and richer and richer. And you don't have to convince any rural person of that, They can see that, billionaires are richer than they've ever been at any moment in their life, while working families feel like they're struggling more than they have before.
Is there a challenge in organizing politically in rural areas just because of the rural nature? I mean, there's so much distance between people and distance between small communities. How do you sort of bridge those distances when you are trying to motivate people to think politically?
I mean, it's true. I mean, Okanagan County, where I live, is the most rural county in Washington State, right? I mean, it's got 45,000 people and it's the size of Rhode Island. So that distance is real, and I think part of an organizing model that's successful recognizes and holds true that there's natural leaders within every community. We talk a lot about who is our base at Rural People's Voice, and our base of folks are the natural leaders in every individual area that we continue to build connection and real belonging within a movement like Rural People's Voice within or across. Same with our steering committee, they're from Tonasket to Pateros out to Leavenworth and Chelan, Wenatchee. And those kinds of routes help us rely less on 2 to 3 people and instead start to rely on a network of people who really want to come together and help build a better future.
So what issues do you find reach across geographic distance? When you encourage people to run for office, do you offer them something to focus on? Do you say this should be your issue, or this is what's in front of your constituency?
We have what we call our kind of Rural People's Platform, and that platform came from thousands of listening conversations, initially in Adrian's 2020 legislative campaign, and then we've built on it through lots of listening sessions, community events, and that platform really reflects the issues that matter most to most people. But every race obviously has its own sphere of issues that it's most connected to, but we get behind candidates who support that platform. And broadly speaking, the platform includes things like good childcare, or great schools no matter what your zip code is, or housing that's untethered from a market that serves only the wealthiest. You could even see like a housing market that ensures that kids can come back to the communities that they were raised in. It talks about clean land and clean water. So things that most of us care about. But one of the things that I think we've learned a lot when supporting candidates is that obviously if you think about school boards, you think about PUDs, there's a scope of issues that we see connected to those positions, but most of these seats have so much overlap with so many of the elements of that platform. Like last year we worked on a PUD race in Okanagan County, and the candidate was a residential plumber who was just incredible, genuinely. I mean, just such a great human. And I would go with him when he knocked on doors, and he would knock on doors and introduce himself and say, "How you doing?" He would check in with people, and he would ask about what they think about the PUD. And then he would talk about what he thinks the PUD could do, right? And at the heart of his whole platform was, he wants to see the PUD helping with weatherization of homes so that our electric rates can actually stay low, but also we can be safer from fire and safer from smoke and safer from heat. And he wants the PUD to be leading in broadband, and he wants those weatherization jobs to be great jobs. So this PUD leader, who's ostensibly running for a position that has to do with electricity and a few other things, is actually out there trying to win things like great jobs. And he's trying to close the gap between an elected leader and everyday folks just in the way he's campaigning, right, which is knocking on doors and talking to people. And he's talking about our homes and weatherization, and frankly, the root of that is housing, right, which is I don't think anyone would contest this. It is, one of the biggest issues facing North Central Washington, period.
Really?
So I do think there's so much overlap across the platform, regardless of what seat you're running for. And the more we can start to see the connectivity, and the more we can ask our candidates to challenge what is the status quo in their seats, I think the better we're served in the long run.
Has a candidate associated with Rural People's Voice made office to this point?
Yes, we've supported a few candidates. Last year we supported 5, which was really our first year of endorsements. So we've had 2 out of the 5 made it forward. One of the things we talk a lot about too is when you run for office, you get a megaphone, right? It's a platform that you get to stand on. So win or lose, we want candidates to be winning something. If you're running for office, if you're running for county commissioner, you're running for town council, and you lose that race, but along the way, you talked about housing in ways that challenged what the status quo is about housing, or you talked about good jobs and what it takes to bring them here, or you talked about building sidewalks in South Wenatchee. That's something that we win when someone got the microphone. So, I think as we continue to build our skill and our capacity, we don't just endorse and recruit candidates, we actually do get in the race and help them win if they go through our full endorsement process.
We've talked about Rural People's Voice in the context of Okanagan County and the Methow Valley, but you've had candidates elsewhere. Arlette Lopez Rodriguez was probably the youngest candidate I've ever heard of for
Yes.
Wenatchee School Board. She didn't advance in that race, but she's still a force to be reckoned with, and she's still working with Rural People's Voice at this time.
Yeah, Arlette was our community organizer last year. Now she's helping us with canvassing, which is really kind of going door to door and talking to people about what issues are biggest for them. And she's on our steering committee.
So Rural People's Voice also has an action fund, a political action committee. So how do you decide where to spend your dollars for endorsement or for candidates that you believe in?
Again, we leaned on our steering committee to help us set the criteria around who we were going to get behind. Because the decisions of the organizations should be the decisions of people who are most affected by the outcomes of these races. So our political action committee is really relatively small. When we think about the scope of investments we make, we look through lots of criteria. One, we think about whether or not they align with what we call kind of the profile of a people's leader. So are they going to work to refuse to divide us? Do they have skin in the game? Like, do they know what it's like to wear the shoes of everyday folks? Are they going to choose people over and over again instead of profits for a few people at the top? So we look at their alignment with the people's profile. We look at the importance of the race and the significance of the seat. We look at how viable the race is and whether or not the candidate has an opportunity to win. Sometimes we look at the dangerousness of the opponent. And when I say dangerous, I think there are definitely some folks who run for office. They usually don't win in North Central Washington, but sometimes they run for office in ways that I think can bring more chaos and more division in a community. And then the other piece we look at is the role of Rural People's Voice. So sometimes people run for office and they've got an incredible network of people. They've got lots of skill and experience. And our role is less important than it would be in another race.
One of the reasons you're able to visit with us today in Wenatchee is because you're getting ready for your candidate and campaign training sessions that are coming up.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about those.
Yeah, so May 6th we'll have one in Omak, and May 7th we'll have one in here in Wenatchee. Now the intention of them is to really offer sort of campaigning 101. And it'll be for any interested candidates now or interested candidates in the future, as well as campaign volunteers. It's the sad reality that if you volunteer in a campaign, it's really hard work. And oftentimes people burn out, and then we end up starting from scratch again the next time over. So we're thinking about ways that we can bring more people into campaigns and support them across time, have a sense of connection and investment in them so that we've got more folks who can show up and actually position our candidates to do the work we need them to do, which is talk to people, right? It's go to the doors and listen and do as much as they can to both represent what folks need and, like we said, use their megaphone to talk about issues that people really care about.
How can people get involved with those sessions if they want to?
Yeah, they can go to check out our website, ruralpeoplesvoice.org, or send me an email, Elana at ruralpeoplesvoice.org, and we'll get them signed up.
Elana Maynor, co-director with Rural People's Voice. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Jefferson. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
You're watching the NCWLIFE channel.